Hey everybody, welcome back to Winamac Hockey. Today we're talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, breaking down their season and looking towards the offseason. Let's hop into the video. All right, fellas, so today we're talking about the one, the only Philadelphia Flyers, which honestly, they had a little bit of a disappointing season, quite frankly. Looking at their roster, did not anticipate them finishing as low as they did in the standings. I mean, I know their division was tough this season, but still, little surprising. They finished with a 25, 46, and 11 record and a minus 97 goal differential. That's tough. And honestly, as much as we might troll Carter Hart in this video, spoiler alert, I don't think it was all his fault, just being honest, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Cap space, fellas. They've got $5 million to work with. They have the 5th overall draft pick, so they have some things that they can do. But let's break down why this season turned out the way it did. And Jake, why don't you start us off?
All right, Dom. Well, I'm going to start off by saying I refuse to say another word until you watching this video hit the subscribe button. All right, they definitely did it because Flyers fans, they're a supportive fan base. So now I'll get into it. I want to say it's not Carter Hart's fault. But if we do want to put the blame on somebody, I say we shove it all on Mike Yeo. That guy was the Blues coach for about half a season, and I had to watch that guy throw that team into the dumpster until they kicked him to the curb. They hired Craig Berube, and he won the team a cup with the exact same roster. So I'm going to say if he could turn a bottom-feeding Blues team into a cup, if he could turn a cup team into a bottom feeder, then the Flyers getting rid of him, maybe they win the cup. Maybe that's too far, but I think that is the power of Mike Yeo. He's that bad that he's the reason why the Flyers sucked last year.
And we apologize, Vancouver, in advance.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
Yeah. So, Matt, I saw you kind of shaking your head at the comment with Carter Hart. Is he the sole reason that this team was as bad as they were this year?
No, I think Mike Yeo, like Jake said, had a lot to do with it. I think also what had a lot to do with it this year was injuries. I think to a lot of their top guys as well. It wasn't just bottom forward guys that were getting hurt. It was guys like Sean Couturier missing a lot of games. It was guys like Kevin Hayes missing a lot of games, Ryan Ellis missing a lot of games. And you add that all together, those are the guys that they were looking to count on. Like Ryan Ellis, they just brought in, the dude got injured immediately. So that kind of ruined the steam of the team. And it didn't help that the coaching, like we said in the past with other teams, it's the combination of injuries with bad coaching that doesn't know how to address those injury problems. And then the goaltending, what didn't help either with not great play from either goaltenders.
Absolutely. So, hey, talking about injuries, do you think that there's something going on with the training staff? Do you think that they look to adjust that a little bit as well as the coaching staff?
Yeah, it's too bad. I'll let you go, Matt.
Okay. I think it definitely has to do with the fact that this team, I don't know, it's just they definitely have to look to address that going into in the off season here. It's definitely something they want to look forward to. I think if you have this many injuries going down in one point of the season, especially when it's like a lot of the injuries other than Ryan Ellis were forward injuries and were kind of injuries early in the season. Kind of like it's one thing like players trying to get more into the season. Maybe they're not as stretched out or something like that. They didn't work out that well in the off season, led to injuries earlier in the year. But then it's like they played a couple games. So they were obviously ready for the season. So it had to do with some type of issues, whether it was the trainers just not giving them anything to help stretch out or heal their bodies or what. But it's something that you definitely have to look to address.
Yeah, it's too bad that the players' bodies aren't as strong as the plot armor on Mike Yeo. I mean, seriously, they've tried to kill this guy so many times, and he's been brought back more times than Loki. How does he still keep finding NHL jobs? How?
I don't know. Maybe that's a video for another day. All right, fellas. So hey, obviously there was a couple of things that led to Philly having the season that they did. But let's look at the silver lining here and a part that I know that we thoroughly enjoy with the season recap, and that is the MVPs of the season. So Matt, I want to come to you first here. Who do you think was the best player for Philly this season?
I think it has to be Travis Konechny. I think the type of season that he had 36 assists, 16 goals, 52 points in 79 games. The plus or minus wasn't great, but when you look at it, like we said before, Couturier being down for most of the year, Kevin Hayes being down for most of the year, those are two of your top centers. So the fact that their winger was still able to have that much production while losing their top two centers on the roster, that's huge. That's something without that, and they might have been even farther down the list. And he was able to work mostly in the second pair or the second group of the forwards, but he worked a lot on the top pair as well when players like Tim Atkinson went down. And he was a very versatile guy, can play well on defense, can shoot the puck as well, and a really good playmaker. And he's a guy that they're going to look forward to having for years to come.
Yeah, Jake, thoughts on Matt's pick, and then who do you have as well?
Yeah, I think Konechny was a great guy for that team. Someone who I wouldn't have expected to have such a good year, but he definitely was one of the reasons why they had any offense. And I'm going to have to go a little off the board with my pick because I'm going to have to go with the guy who wasn't even on the team to end the year, and that was Claude Giroux. And that's because he did so much for this team's future just by leaving. The return for him being Owen Tippett, a first and a third, they can do if they use those picks correctly. In addition to having Tippett, that's such good value for Giroux, who was probably going to leave in free agency anyways. So I just think it was really noble of him to get such a high return for the Flyers.
Yeah, fellas, I think I'm going with what a lot of the fans might go with as well, and that's Cam Atkinson. The guy comes over from Columbus. The fan base was super pumped to have him come into the building, give a new spark. And he played 73 games. So despite the injury troubles that they had, he did play a significant amount of games for them. And in those 73 games, he put up 50 points right on the nose, 23 of those points being goals. And notably, being an all-around great player, he was only a -2 on this team that had a -97 goal differential. So overall, I think that he had himself a pretty decent season. Especially with it being his first in the organization. So, yeah, what do you guys think of Cam Atkinson, and how well do you think he adjusted to the Flyers in his first season?
I think when you look at Cam Atkinson, you have to remember this man was a 40-goal scorer, and that was even before Panarin was on the Blue Jackets with him. He was playing with a nobody at center who I don't even remember, and he scored 40 goals. So this is just the beginning of what he can do with the Flyers, and he has so much more to show to Flyers fans. But the crazy thing about this to me is how you could look at a bunch of so many different players on this roster and say, this is the best player from the Flyers past season. They're a deep team. It's just a matter of adding a few pieces and getting everybody to sync up game in and game out.
And stay healthy, for sure.
That's exactly.
I mean, we saw how it affected teams in the playoffs. The teams that weren't able to stay healthy ultimately didn't have what it took to keep playing with the depth of some of the other teams. And ultimately, we saw that Tampa in the Stanley Cup Finals. Their injuries just kept piling up and piling up. So if Philly can stay healthy, their season next year might be completely different, and their roster may not look much different. So with that, fellas, let's look into part 2 here, the offseason. Let's talk about some of the changes that Philly can make here. Obviously, coaching has got to be one of them. But they've got $5 million in cap, so it's not like they can do a whole lot unless they move some guys. So what do you think that their strategy is going to be, / what do you think, or what would you do in their shoes?
Well, the Flyers are in a pretty rough spot right now because all the people who are saying, well, goaltending is the problem, and they might want to look to free agency to find a replacement for Carter Hart, or not so much a replacement. You've got him locked in. He's your goalie for the future. But if you don't think he's ready, you have another goalie that you can look to that's already on the Flyers, and that's Igor Fedotov. I might be butchering that, but the problem with him is he just tried to head out of Russia, and they said, whoa, 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 not so fast. So now, who knows? He's probably in the brig in Russia, but they detained him. He couldn't come over, and that could be bad news for the Flyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think that they could potentially do with that situation? Because that's not a very common situation at that.
I mean, you go in at night. I don't know. I think there comes a point where the NHL might have to. I don't know what the NHL could do. Russia's psycho at this point. I don't know. They're gonna send him off to fight against Ukraine, and I don't know if the Flyers can do anything to intercept that.
Yeah, that's tough for sure. Matt, so let's come over to you. What do you think you got to do here? I mean, obviously goaltending, coaching, a little bit of depth. What are you doing here if you're the GM?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about that I completely forgot happened this offseason, but they signed John Tortorella to be their head coach. So, I mean, he's one guy coming in, definitely going to add a boost to this roster. He's definitely going to be better than Mike Yeo. There's no doubt about that. And whether the players get wary of him like Columbus did, I don't know. But so following Cam Atkinson over here as well to Philadelphia. But yeah, I think it's really just about bringing back your RFAs. I think that's a really important thing for them. Jake talked about it before, how important Owen Tippett is. I think he's one guy you got to look at as an RFA. You got to bring him back. If that trade makes sense at all, you bring him back. And I think just looking for a goaltender, just looking for a guy that can replace the problem is you still have Carter Hart on the roster. He's still going to be playing for this team unless you look for a trade. But I think for the most part, you just let Martin Jones walk. Don't even touch him. Don't even talk to him. Don't even pick up the phone if he calls the building, and let him walk. And then just look for another goaltender, maybe a more veteran goaltender with a little more experience in free agency. But other than that, just rely on your better coaching this season and continue building that depth.
Yeah, their defensive depth is really good too when you really break down the roster. So they don't need to go out and spend a bunch of money on a goaltender. I mean, they can't afford to anyway. But if they can just go out and get a halfway decent goalie, I think that's going to really help them because Carter Hart's performance this season just was not anywhere near what an NHL goalie should be performing. The consistency wasn't there, and even when he was having a good night, it still wasn't phenomenal, which is what you're trying to see, that potential in a young goaltender. And besides his one stellar season, we're just not seeing it. Jake, I see some thoughts running through your head here. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I'm just getting the mental image of Martin Jones walking out in front of the building and then Flyers management like flipping off the lights and hitting the floor like, is he gone? But yeah, I think definitely don't bring Martin Jones back. But honestly, I think you wait out and you see how the situation goes with Fedotov because he was such a good goalie. He won silver with Russia not too long ago in international play. He had like a .941 save percentage in 6 games, which is ridiculous. He's a solid goalie, and I think that him playing with a revamped Tortorella team could be really good next year.
Yeah, and with the cap space, there's not a whole lot they can do when it comes to spending money on depth. Do you guys think that they potentially move anybody to try and get some younger players in the building? Because we know that they have quite a few vets on that team. Do they try to move somebody, or do you just kind of let this season play out, see how it goes? Maybe your guys can stay healthy, and then you get a better look at where your team's at.
I think that one guy they could look at, not so much in the offseason, but maybe at the deadline, is James Van Riemsdyk. He's got 1 year left. He's making $7 million a year, which is way too much. You should not keep him for that price. But someone at the deadline might say, this is a veteran guy who could play top 6. We can get him for $3.5 million. Let's do it. And I think the Flyers could get a good return for that.
Mm-hmm. Matt, what do you think? Do you think that they're going to move some vets? Do you think they're just going to let the roster kind of play out this season? What do you anticipate from the Flyers?
Well, I think they're probably going to make a little bit of moves here. I think it's mostly just so they can get more of their young players in the lineup, guys like Bobby Brink, or getting more time for Cam York. they're going to be looking to move some of those guys. And that's why it makes a lot of sense. And I agree with Jake that getting Van Riemsdyk up out of there and getting any value you can for him so you can play a guy like Bobby Brink, which is somebody that didn't play many games until the end of the season. So hopefully this year he can play the full season with more time on the sheet there. But I think getting more time for Cam York, a guy like maybe a Travis Sanheim or like I don't know, even if somebody wants to take on the contract of Ristolainen, like kind of those second pair guys who are like weren't bad by any means, but when you're getting paid $5 million, they're both getting paid just Sanheim just under $5 million, Ristolainen at $5 million. Sanheim is a free agent after the next season, so he could be a deadline acquisition and make a lot of sense for another team. But a guy like Ristolainen, it's going to be a team that's got to love him if they're going to take on that contract for that amount of years. But yeah, I think just getting out with the old and in with the new, bringing in some of those younger players and getting them more playing time.
Yeah, so fellas, it definitely looks like that this team is going to have an interesting season upcoming, which can either be really exciting for a Flyers fan or really nerve-wracking depending on how it goes. So let's move into part 3 here, which is next season's preview. And this one is going to be a little more interesting than some of the other teams we've talked about thus far because the other teams, we seem to have a clear path of where they're going. Philly, they could just admit defeat here and start tearing things down. Or, like we said, with all the injuries, they can take another season and really, truly evaluate where they're at. So with that, where do you guys think that they are going to end up in the Eastern Conference this season?
I think that they're going to end up around 6th, missing the playoffs. I think they're moving in the right direction by doing absolutely nothing, quite honestly. They just need to give their young guys time to grow and develop. But at the same time, the East is so good. There's so many good teams in the East right now, which thankfully, Flyers, you've got young guys. By the time they're ready to be at their peak, the East should have gone a little downhill by then. So I think they're doing everything right, but the playoffs aren't it this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Jake has them around 6th. Matt, how about you? Where do you think Philly could finish this upcoming season?
I'm thinking maybe even as high as 5th. And I'm saying that because I think a team like Pittsburgh could take a step back, especially some of the talks that they're having with some of their older guys that aren't going well. So if those guys go out the doors, that could really hurt Pittsburgh. The Islanders, we really don't know what we're going to see with a team like that. They had a really bad year this year after being perennial conference finalists a couple of years before that. So, and obviously we talked about New Jersey already, a rebuilding team, and Columbus is in that same boat. So I think it's going to be a wild one. I don't see them touching a team like the Rangers or Carolina or even Washington, but like 5th place is definitely on the horizon there. If they can continue, like Jake said, just not do anything and just kind of just ride the wave of these young players.
Yeah, and I'll ask this question. With the East being so good and really emerging this year, do you think that puts Philly in more of a pressurized situation to rebuild, or do you think that it doesn't really matter? They're just going to evaluate what they have and continue to do their thing?
I think honestly they're sort of in a rebuild right now. I know they've added some pieces like Ristolainen, which was questionable, but I think that they built a good team to have a mix of veteran talent and youth. So I think they know exactly what they're doing. They know that this is the time to rebuild, and they're doing it pretty well.
Yeah, and it seems like that it's not a complete tear down, getting rid of all the core guys, as we've seen with some other teams recently. So, yeah, any other thoughts about Philadelphia before we wrap up this video, fellas?
I do have a question for the viewers, and that is, who is a worse dictator, Vladimir Putin or John Tortorella?
Maybe that's a question for Cam Atkinson since he's dealt with the guy and now he's coming back to play with him.
Yeah. Or Fedotov, who could be serving both men in the same year if he comes back.
That's so true. Matt, you have any other thoughts?
I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun seeing Tortorella back in the league again. Hopefully, they keep him away from some of the youngsters that he doesn't really seem to like, and try to build a good team there in Philadelphia. I think it's definitely an exciting time. And you got these young players like this bringing it up. As long as Tortorella doesn't want to trade them all for a bunch of 35-year-olds to fit his scheme, they should be okay to continue and maybe find a wild card somewhere in the future.
Yep. It's going to be an interesting one for sure. So Flyers fans, if you're still with us, thank you for tuning in, and let us know in the comments below what you think about your team. What are they going to do this year? We'd love to get some more insight from some Philly fans. So yeah, thanks guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Winamac Hockey.
Well, this is going to be a blooper. Matt's trying to block out the sun.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be everything in the video. We're just going to see a giant ball of fire.
Okay, I think we're good to go. If that falls, that's sorry.
A lot better.
It took a lot out of me.